Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I know we'll get some people probably trickling in for the next 10 minutes or so. That's usually how it goes. But thank you all for joining us on this wonderful, beautiful Tuesday after, well, evening really. We're going to be talking about small fruits this evening. Lee's joining us tonight, and he's our presenter, as well as my co-host for this evening. But I just wanted to take a second for folks that might be new to the series. I know we had some people sign up midway through. I wanted to take a second and introduce myself and introduce my organization. My name is Cassandra Clevenger, and I'm the Community Resource Coordinator at Trumbull Neighborhood Partnership. I do a lot of work in food systems, helping connect people to resources. I work on different food coalitions, working collectively with organizations such as OSU Extension, to better serve our residents and to build a stronger, more sustainable food system throughout the Mahoning Valley. So these classes and these efforts are part of that. So thank you all for joining in to be a part of that. And we also have a farmer's market coming up. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. April 24th, we have a community-wide cleanup in Warren. If you're interested in volunteering for that, please, please, please let me know. Our organizer for that's actually on this call tonight, Savasti. She can also help you out if you want to send her a private message during the presentation tonight. And I guess from there, those were my couple little commercials I wanted to get out there. I'll go ahead and pass it off to Lee.
Thanks, Cassandra. So I think most of you, maybe a couple of new faces on here. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Lee Beers. I'm the Extension Educator for Agriculture and Natural Resources in Trumbull County. So I'm based right here in Cortland. So tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about brambles, which are going to include raspberries, blackberries, and we're going to be talking about blueberries and strawberries. So as you were coming in, you answered a poll. And I'm going to end this and share. I was hoping we would see something very clear about either you hated strawberries or you hated blueberries or something we can trim down on, but it looks like it's a 50-50 split. So we're going to cover them all. But I do ask that if you have a very specific question that I am not answering for you, please, please, please put your question in the chat box. And Cassandra or Amy, from Soil and Water, if you want to interrupt me, if I don't see it, and just let me know that there's a question and I will do my best. Okay, so to get started, I do want to follow up from last week for those of you who were on, we were talking about tillage and soil health in general and soil fertility. I came across this on Facebook. Can anybody tell me what's wrong here? Anybody use the chat box and mute yourself? No drainage, right? So this is a very common symptom of if you just take a lawn where you have a very undisturbed surface for many, many years, and then you go in with a rototiller or a plow or some sort of tillage, and you turn that into a garden, what you're going to do is you're going to collapse all that pore space. Next thing you know, your soil is going to sink down in, and it creates what I call the rototiller bathtub. So because you are destroying all of that pore space and that soil structure over time, what you do is you create a nice tub of a depression where water is going to sit. So now you have a drainage issue where if this was untilled, you would have still wet soil because it's in the spring, but this was especially bad. So I saw this on Facebook and one of my friends posted. I didn't tell them I was stealing your picture to use them as an example. But I thought it was worthwhile in noting that you just have to be a little aware of what you're doing to your soil when you start tilling. All right, so there are several books and publications that you can purchase that I'm going to be referencing and where most of this information came from. The first one is going to be the Midwest Home Fruit Production Guide. Yeah, I've got that one here. We have these in our office. This one is $26. There's going to be several others. But if you do want a copy of these, please let me know. We have them in our office. You can pay for them. We can put them in the mail. Or if you want to purchase them, you can go to CFAES. Sorry, I said that too fast. CFAES Publications on a Google search, and you can find all the publications that come out of Ohio State University. And this is the one that we, myself and Eric Draper, were talking about several weeks ago, controlling disease and insects in home fruit plantings. And a quick plug, if you are thinking about tree fruits, apples, pears, or grapes, Eric is going to be joining us next week to be discussing those tree fruits. But today we're going to be focusing on the smaller fruits. Thank you, Cassandra, for putting that in the chat box. A couple of other ones, the Midwest Small Fruit Pest Management book and the Brambles Production Management and Marketing. So these are fantastic, especially if you're looking at the Brambles book. If you're not sure what to grow, this is a great publication. It'll help you narrow it down to the very specific cultivar that will meet the needs for your production practices. All right, integrative pest management. You're probably tired of hearing about this already. You know, Pam Bennett and Jacqueline Kowalski have already talked about this earlier in the series. When it comes to fruit, IPM is your best friend because a lot of our fruits that we grow, other than blueberries are, you know, I'm partial, and we'll talk about that later. Blueberries are pretty hardy and resistant to most of our diseases. You get into blackberries, raspberries, strawberries, and grapes, tree fruits. There are so many diseases that want to kill our fruit crop. So IPM, I'm going to hound on this for a little bit before we get into individual crops, because this is so very important for a successful fruit crop. Let's move this Zoom thing out of the way. So some fruit crops have a lot of pests and diseases. Grapes, if you are going to try and grow Concord grapes organically in Northeastern Ohio, I can almost guarantee it, you're going to have black rot. If you're going to have raspberries, you are almost guaranteed to have some sort of insect pest, including spotted-winged Drosophila, that will eat your fruit. Some fruit crops have very few, and I already mentioned this, blueberries. They do have diseases, but when it comes to blueberries, your biggest challenge is going to be physiological, and that's going to be related to soil pH and soil management and fertility. So small scale and backyard and organic production choice should start with IPM decision. Don't put your plants in a bad spot. We want to put our plants, our fruit crops, in a position to succeed. If we put them in the corner with poor drainage, poor airflow, and poor light, they are always going to have some sort of disease or pest issues. Oh, and Amy did mention some of the publications are available in PDF. Yes, if you do purchase the PDF, the price is quite a bit different, and you can access those immediately. Oh, let me back up here. Selection of cultivars. Coming from a plant genetics background, I can tell you there are night and day differences between a good variety with resistance and a bad variety with very little resistance. So if you are wanting to put in any of these small fruits or any fruit in general, don't buy the plants on a whim, especially if you've been to a box store recently and you see the blueberries that have fruit on them already. You can almost guarantee if you plant those in the ground, they're going to die, either from frost or just poorly adapted to our day length at this time of year. So if you're going to be planting fruit, start planning now for next season. And plan is in bold there because it is very, very important for successful fruit crops. So if you're not familiar with IPM, it's just what you do every day and just being a little bit more intentional and thoughtful about your practices. So again, I have a bare spot of ground over on the side of my lot. I think it would be great to put in 15 blueberry bushes. Okay. Now, is that side of the lot going to get enough sunlight? Is it a low spot? What is the soil pH? Was it a old house lot that was filled in and there's a lot of fill on there? You're probably going to put blueberries in there with clay soils, poor drainage, high pH, and they're not going to succeed. So just being a little bit more intentional about your planting and not just planting things based on space or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're doing it with the best of intentions for your crop. So there are multiple strategies you can use to avoid economic thresholds for your crop damage. Economic thresholds means that you're going to lose a certain amount of crop, but actually implementing some practice is going to be more expensive than losing that crop. So, right? So there's that threshold of, if I do nothing, I'm going to lose more money than doing something. But when it comes to fruit, cultural and mechanical practices are going to be your biggest friend because they're cheap. They don't require any special training or skill outside of pruning. Pruning just takes a little bit of practice, but you don't have to have a pesticide license. You don't have to have a backpack sprayer. You don't have to have a air blast sprayer. Spacing, pruning, just some of those very basic plant management practices will go a long, long way. Biological control, this is great in theory. In practice, it's not that practical unless you are growing in a hoop house or some sort of confined enclosure. Biological control for insect pests is practical, but again, you have to be able to have them confined so that they're not leaving your crops to find food elsewhere. You want to make sure that any sort of natural enemies you introduce are eating the pest on your crops. Chemical control is usually and should be your last line of defense. It really only comes into play when your cultural and mechanical practices fail. Biological control is not as practical as we would like it to be, but if your cultural and mechanical practices don't work, you may need to start looking at fungicides or insecticides to control your pest. But again, that's going to be your last line of defense. And if you do use those, you want to make sure that they are the least lethal or the least troublesome of the chemicals you choose. Again, this is something that we do every day, but just being a little bit more intentional. So if you garden in a 10 by 10 raised bed, or if you have a 3-acre commercial urban farm, you're probably looking at your crops every day, especially this time of year. If you put in radishes or cabbage, or some of your cold season crops, you're probably out there looking, are they popping through the ground? If you're like me, I'm always moving away the dirt and like, where are they going? Where are we at for germination? But you want to continue that throughout the entire season. Look at the leaves, look at the underside of the leaves, take a couple of fruit, put them in some salt water, and do any worms crawl out of it, and identify those samples that you do get. Because if you have the incorrect identification, your control strategies may be entirely off. That won't necessarily make sense. So identify the pest that's causing the damage. And if you need help with that, you can call me. I'm happy to look at pictures that you send or by email or text. If I can't identify it, you can drop it off and I can look at it underneath a microscope. And a lot of times, are the damage that we're seeing actually caused by disease, or is it an insect? Is it a weed? Or when it comes to fruit, are we seeing wildlife damage? Squirrels and deer and rabbits, they love to eat the stems, and birds love to eat the fruit. Use appropriate control measures directed at pests. When it comes to birds, your best strategy is exclusion. Don't try to put out some sort of bird bait or scare tactics. You want to use something that's appropriate and that is lawful. So number 5 there is the label is the law. If you are trying to control wildlife, I can tell you right now, there's nothing that you can use to control wildlife that is legal, unless you have a very, very specific pesticide license, but that's very, very rare. Bears are known to eat berry bushes, and yet they absolutely are. We actually had bear poop in our blackberry bushes on our property in 2020. So make sure you're not out there in a very thick blackberry bush collecting wild samples without making lots of noise. Going back to what Eric was talking about, pesticides, avoid misuse. If it's not on the label, if your crop is not on the label, do not use it. All right, and organic is possible. So a lot of people think that I'm talking about using chemicals as a control. Again, chemicals are the last line of defense. Organic is possible, but be prepared for some less than ideal looking fruit, which, you know, we all should be. Just be prepared that you then have to sell those fruit that may be blemished or imperfect, but still perfectly fine to eat and consume. And you will probably lose a lot more fruit in an organic system to disease and pests than you would in a what we consider traditional farming setting. So just, you know, set your expectations accordingly, but you can do organic. So this is what we call the disease triangle. So we have the host, which is going to be the plant. So if I'm growing blueberries, the blueberries will be the host. We have to have the environment. So when we think about disease, it's going to be cold and damp for the most part when it comes to fruit diseases, and then the pathogen. So if we are thinking about blueberries, again, mummyberry is going to be a common pathogen. So we have to have cold, damp conditions. We have to have the host, but the host also has to be at the correct developmental stage, because if it's mummyberry, they only infect flower tissue. So if the pathogen is present, the environment is present, but the host plant is not flowering, there is no disease. So as a kid who grew up in the 90s, I think of Captain Planet. When our powers combined, I am Captain Planet. But in this case, when the powers combine, we get disease, right? So we have to have all three of these things to have a disease episode. Now, if we think about how can we break this triangle down so that we don't get disease, you know, as much as we like to think we can't control the environment. We can sort of control the pathogen with sterile practices and just good best management practices to reduce the actual inoculum in the environment. But really the only thing we do have control of is the host. So when I say the host, I want to grow blueberries. Now, do I want to grow Blu-ray or blue crop? Do I want to grow Patriot? If I grow Patriot, it's going to be a little bit later blooming. I may completely move that blueberry life cycle out of the mummyberry disease cycle, because it's going to bloom after the disease is present in the environment. So when it comes to disease, anytime we have free water, wet, damp conditions, that is a perfect environment for disease. And it doesn't have to be on the ground, right? So when we think of free water, we're thinking we're walking out to our garden or our farm and we are wearing our knee boots, it's just wet. That's not necessarily the case. If you woke up yesterday morning, or even, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, this morning, it was foggy. So if we think about all that free water that is actually out in the environment, now that free water isn't so much of an issue right now because there are no leaves. So any sort of moisture that is on that stem is going to drop quickly. Fast forward 3 to 4 weeks, we have a lot of free moisture in the air. We have a heavy fog. Now we have leaves that are touching each other. So we have a water between the leaves. So when the leaves get stuck together, they don't dry out very quick. That's a perfect opportunity for fungal diseases to start those infection periods. Oh, back up here. So many cultural disease control methods are aimed at promoting faster drying of the plant parts. So we're going to talk about pruning. Pruning makes your life easier when it comes to harvest because you're not trying to wade through all of the dead, old, non-productive parts of the plant, but it also removes some of the leaf material and will actually increase the airflow moving through the plant. And we want to think about weed control. So if we have high, tall weeds surrounding our plants, there's not good airflow. It creates that free air or free water in the environment. So we want to make sure that we are getting rid of those weeds, either mowing them, mulching, herbicides, whatever we need to do to reduce weed pressure. And I already mentioned proper pruning practices and sanitation. So when you go through and you do some of these cleanups that we're going to talk about with either pruning or just general maintenance, don't put those in your compost pile. either burn them, put them in the trash, send them down the road. If you know that you have diseased tissue, get it off your property, right? So cleaning it up, putting it in your compost pile, and then putting it right back on your garden is only going to increase and extend that disease cycle for multiple years. Right. Any questions before I move on to site selection and soil? Bridget, you had a question. One or more reasons why drainage is important? Yes. Sometimes drainage is the most important thing that we need to consider depending on your location. Mulch or wood chips is great for keeping the weeds down. Absolutely. Cardboard, newspaper, or some of the more easier to obtain mulch. If you really want to get into it, you can put down plastic mulch. Although plastic mulch is something that is great for a short period of time, probably 2 to 3 years with our fruit crops. But because our blueberries can live 50, 60 years, that's not a permanent solution. You know, when it comes to brambles, we have to be aware that our mulch, whether it is a thick layer of cardboard or paper, may actually inhibit some of those new shoots coming up from the ground. Wood chips or mulch that is able to be penetrated with new growth is actually probably the best solution. But also be aware that when it comes to mulch, we're also robbing a little bit of our soil nutrients in the very top layer of soil. So it's a trade-off, but typically weeds are more troublesome than soil fertility. So having good control with mulch and your weeds is better than having to apply a little bit more fertilizer. If there are any other questions, please use the chat box. And just a reminder, so we're in northeastern Ohio. So, you know, I think most of us are in Trumbull County. They updated the cold hardiest zone map in 2012. This changed most of our cold hardiest zones in the region from zone 5 to zone 6. I'm going to tell you right now, never buy anything that is zone 6 that is going to be a long-lived plant. Always buy zone 5 or lower. Although we are warming up, you know, if we had a winter like we did this year, most of those zone 6 plants are not going to come through without significant damage. So if you're looking for plants and blueberries and small fruits, choose a variety that is zone 5. You know, if it gets down to zone 5B, to that much detail, choose those over anything that's zone 6. Because our cold hardiest zones is based on a rolling average. It doesn't take into account for those severe cold snaps that we get. And if you are on a larger property where you are thinking about putting in fruit crops, so cold air goes downhill. When it comes to fruit, and you know, if Eric talks about peaches next week, you're going to learn all about frost and air movement. Frost is going to be the biggest abiotic or non-fungal or insect pest that we're going to deal with that will lead to yield loss. Because if we have plants that start blooming too early and we get a late season frost, and I mean a heavy frost, it will actually destroy those flower tissues. It'll break open the cells inside, leaks all the tissue out. Those flowers are no longer viable. If you don't have flowers, you don't have fruit. So if I'm planting fruit, I don't want to plant it at the bottom of a hill. Cold air is going to go down. You know, I want to put it up at the top. Now, if this slope is facing north, so the sun is always going to be coming from the opposite direction. So if you can, plant on a south facing slope. Sorry, it's been late in the day. That way you get maximum sun early in the day. That frost is either going to be minimized or it's going to warm up much faster. You probably noticed this on the north side of your house. In our spring and fall, you'll see a nice frosted grass area that's in the perfect shape of the shadow of your house. That's true when it comes to anything else. So avoid planting at the bottom of a hill to prevent frost damage. Right. Again, plan. Think about the basics. Is it location, sunny, air circulation? Are you planting right next to in a corner with a privacy fence? You're not going to get airflow through there. You know, you're going to have a nice dead zone where air is going to go into it. It's not going to move very fast, and you're not going to get good air circulation. Cultivar selection, I'm going to press on this over and over again. If you choose a bad cultivar, you're just setting yourself up for failure. So choose a cultivar based on its hardiness and disease package versus what the marketing materials tell you, right? Weed control, we already talked about, and improved drainage. Do not plant any fruit whatsoever in a wet area without dealing with the drainage first. And when we talk about drainage, you can either dig ditches or put in some sort of drainage tile to move that water away. But most often, the more practical solution is to build up raised beds. So either 2 feet wide, 2 feet tall of soil with compost mixed in, and plant into that. So that way you're raising the plants up above that damp soil. Usually that's a little bit easier and more cost effective than having somebody come in with an excavator and putting in pipe or digging ditches. So again, if this is a low-lying area, you're better off to just come in, build this area up with soil, and plant into a raised row or a raised area versus trying to drain this area. So again, anytime we have free water, either in the canopy, in the soil, it leads to disease. The best way to get rid of that free water is to increase air and sunlight penetration. So when you're watering your plants, don't go out there and shower from above. Drip irrigation is best, soaker hoses. If you are going to use a wand or some sort of hose-based irrigation, aim for the bottom of the plants. Don't use the full jet so it's splashing water up. Use the most gentle setting on the water so it's going down. It's actually being incorporated into the soil. It's not splashing soil that possibly has disease in it back up onto the plant. Prune is necessary. Space plants apart. This is one of the biggest things that I see beginning farmers struggle with, because when you get I'm going to use a blueberry plant, because when you get them, they're going to be small. They're going to be maybe 6-12 inches tall. They're going to be in this little thing. 5-10 years from now, they're going to be 6-7 feet tall, 5-6 feet wide. And if you plant those too close together, you're going to have them growing into each other. Next thing you know, your plant on the left is shading the plant on the right. The leaves are intermingled. It just becomes a nightmare to prune and pick, and for disease management as well. And I already mentioned lifting certain plants, and that's again raising it up, either in a raised bed or some other way to elevate it up. If you want to put some of these in pots, absolutely do that. There is a trendy method of taking soil, a bag of soil, cutting an X in it, planting a blueberry bush right in the center of it, and letting it do that way. So you leave the plastic around the bag of soil, you put your drip irrigation right in the line. You don't have to worry about too much water or weeds that way. It does work. It's not a high intensive system. So if you're trying to get a lot of yield, I wouldn't go that way. But if you're looking to add some variety throughout the summer to your farm market table, that may be a good way to get some blueberries on the ground. And we talked about this last week, but soil testing is very important. If you are growing tomatoes and green beans and your standard garden vegetables successfully, you can probably grow blackberries, raspberries, and strawberries, right? So you want to be in that 6.5 to 6.8 is our target. If you have a 6.5 to 6.8 pH, you will not grow successful blueberries. And we'll talk about this later on too. But soil testing for blueberries is going to be the most single important thing you can do, along with cultivar selection. And when it comes to fruit, just a little bit of plant physiology or botany, whatever term you want to use here, especially when it comes to pruning. Your flowers produce the fruit. So when you are pruning and checking your plants for scouting for diseases, winter damage, whatever you want to do, you need to know the difference between the flower buds and the vegetative buds. It's pretty easy, but it takes a little bit of practice. If they're big and fat, you can see them from a distance, they're probably going to be flower buds. If you have to get up close and you see the vegetative buds and they're held really close to the stem, you know, sometimes they're not really easy to see. Those are probably going to be vegetative buds that are going to turn into leaves. So if you notice that the top 2 inches of your blueberry bushes are dying after, say, middle of February, it's probably from frost damage. So you can almost guarantee that these flower buds are not going to do anything. So just knowing the difference between reproductive or flower buds and vegetative buds that are going to turn into leaves can be useful for management decisions. If you are concerned about pollination, if you need a lot of blueberries or a lot of brambles, plan on either renting a hive. If you have an acre of blackberries or raspberries, plan on 2 hives per acre. If you're going to grow blueberries, 6 hives per acre. And you can think about honeybees. You can get bumblebee colonies that you essentially come and they are released into the environment afterwards. You don't have to maintain them, but you need to think about pollination, either starting a beekeeping and selling honey as again, a value-added product. But you do need to be thinking about this. And Eric will be talking about this next week when it comes to apple and pear, because you have to have cross-pollination for some. Blueberry gets a little tricky, but most blueberry crops, if you have 2 plants, they're going to cross-pollinate, you're going to have pretty good success. But if you have a couple of pears that aren't aren't compatible, they'll pollinate, but they'll abort the fruit, and now you're not going to have any fruit off of those. But brambles and grapes are self-fruitful. Any questions on IPM before I move on to talk about raspberries and blackberries? How can you attract or attach native pollinators? There are a lot of things you can do. One is maintaining enough food for them to be around. Typically, if you have blueberries or any sort of fruit, they're going to be attracted to the flowers. But again, you want to maintain a good habitat for them, planting dedicated flower patches so that they keep coming back all the time. So they're always in the area. They don't have to come back, for one big flush of food. You want to make sure that they're there all the time. I'm going to butcher the mason bees. I was going to say mud daubers, but mason bees, you can build a mason bee box, and you can put those outside as long as you either clean or replace the tubes every year. They'll make a nest, but it really comes down to habitat and making sure that you have enough food. And I can give you some resources on that, Bridget, if you have any questions more than what I just answered for you. Are there any other questions on IPM before we move into raspberries and blackberries? Okay. All right. So the term brambles is going to include raspberries and blackberries. It's essentially a running vine in the rose family. All right. So again, raspberries, blackberries. You can also throw in black raspberries. But we're going to focus on raspberries and blackberries today. So all brambles have what we call Fluoroquine and Primocane. So if we look over here, this is a Primocane. So think of it primordial. That's the way I remember this, primo. This is the first year. It's not fully developed. So we're going to get into this with raspberries and blackberries. It gets very, very confusing depending on your variety and your fruiting system for your crops. So if you are putting in fruit, save the tag that has all the information for the cultivar and all of that information, because that will dictate how you prune and maintain your fruit crop. So you have the Primocane. So if I put in blackberries this year, I'm going to get Primocanes that are not going to get fruit on them until the next year. So the Primocane is going to grow for 1 year. And we're going to talk about pruning these, and we're going to let those go. the next year they're going to turn into a Fluoroquine. Fluoroquine, just like they sound, they have flowers. And when they flower, they produce fruit. After they fruit, we need to come in and we need to cut out the Fluoroquine, because once they produce fruit, they're not going to produce fruit anymore, except on the raspberries that do. So it does get a little confusing. So again, keeping that information is very, very useful. Question, which small fruit berry can be used as a cash crop? They all can. It just depends on what your customers want. Blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, strawberries can all be sold at a pretty high return on an investment with the proper marketing. So we're going to move right into raspberries. So again, raspberries are in the rubus species. Again, this is in the rose family. You may notice that the flowers of raspberries and blackberries look very much like the apple flowers. It's because they're in the same family of the Rosaceae. So they are perennial. They're herbaceous shrubs. Again, they are biennial. The first year primicanes and the second year fluorocanes. So just like a carrot, first year is vegetative growth, the next year flowers. So the first year, the primocane is all vegetative growth, no flowers, no fruit. The second year, fluorocanes, and that's when you get your fruit. There are 3 different kinds. There are trailing, which are going to be your stereotypical wild brambles. They trail, they're very viney, semi-erect and erect canes. If you're looking for low management or low maintenance, especially when it comes for weed management, semi-erect or erect canes are going to be your better option. They do come in thorny and thornless varieties. Again, when you're choosing a variety of raspberry or any fruit, your first priority should be for disease management. Your second priority should be what are the traits that your customers are looking for. So there are red raspberries and black raspberries, purple raspberries, which are a cross between the black and the red. And again, there are some that out there have primocane and fluoroquine fruiting. Remember, I just said that primocane don't fruit unless they do, right? So again, it gets very, very confusing very quick. So make sure you are hanging on to that tag for your raspberries. So on the primocane fruiting cultivars, these are kind of considered our fall fruiting varieties. So Heritage, a couple of other varieties, they produce new canes from the roots, the same as summer fruiting cultivars. But, and here's the big but, the upper 1/3 to half of each cane is likely to produce fruit during the first year of growth. So this gives you your fall crop. Primocane fruiting cultivars bear a crop in the summer on second year canes like regular raspberries. So these are going to give you a summer crop and a fall crop on mature, established plantings. So when it comes to pruning these, it really depends on knowing your crop, right? And we'll get into pruning here in just a minute. I saw a question came in. Let me check that. Oh, and
That was me responding to a question about cornering, those cash crops and markets, really just looking to fill your niche. I don't want to go into that too much, but I do a lot of work with farmers markets, farmers market managers, and farmers market vendors. If you want to get into that conversation a little deeper, I would love to chat with you and share some stories from other vendors that have been able to find their niche in different markets.
Thanks, Cassandra. So in the fall crop only, you are going to, canes are cut and removed annually. So certain cane diseases that are going to be fungal in nature and insect pests do not become well established in the planting. If you're looking for low maintenance and you want a fall crop only, you can just go through and mow at 1 to 2 inches above the ground. The primocanes, the fluorocanes, all the above. You're going to mow it, and you're going to have a summer crop and a fall crop if your variety is allowing that. You can use manure, but again, when it comes to fruit and manure, be very, very careful. And it will provide a source of nitrogen. And if you're going to use heavy rates of manure, It can also work as a mulch layer and help protect those canes from overwintering. Raspberries and blackberries do not like to be frosted very much. So if you're really pushing them with nitrogen and fertilizer, you're not giving them time to slow down in the fall and winter, you are setting them up for some significant frost damage. So some of the varieties out there for raspberries, there are Red, Prelude, Latham, Nova, Caroline, Polana, Autumn Britain. Those are some of the very common ones. Black raspberries, the Bristol Jewel, Mac Black. Yellow, the common ones are going to be Kiwi Gold and Ann. I have been told, I can't tell the difference, but maybe I don't have the taste buds for it. I have heard people say that yellow raspberries don't taste nearly as good as the red or the black raspberries. I can't attest to that, but just be aware that if you're thinking about putting in some yellow, I wouldn't invest in them too heavily because some people don't like them. And then the purple, there's very few out there, but Royalty is going to be one of the more common ones. Now, remember when I said to know your variety when it comes to raspberries? I hope this drives that message home. So these are all the different cultivars, and the ripening date for those, are they early, are they mid, are they late season? Cultural characteristics that are unique to those. This is going to be a useful chart. And again, you're going to get all this at the end of the series, which is actually next week. If you're looking to have a season extended for raspberry availability, planting some early, mid, and some late season will get you through the season where you're going to have a lot more raspberries available to sell. Excuse me. And then again, here's just some more information on that. It gives you some ideas of ripens 3 weeks before heritage. So if you're thinking about putting in heritage as your foundation, if you want something a little bit earlier, Polana is a good complement to that heritage. So again, planting quality plants, buy from a reputable dealer. Spending an extra $1 or $2 per plant that you know is going to be a good stock will save you hundreds of dollars in the future in labor, mulching, investment, lost crops. Always, always, always buy quality plants. If you are a plantophile like myself, you walk down Home Depot or Lowe's, give it a couple weeks, and all the raspberries that are going to be wilted and look dead are going to be on clearance. And you're going to say, you know, I can probably save that. If you're looking to do this as a hobby, give it a go. If you're looking to do this as a business, pass over those plants because you're just going to add more work to your daily schedule. You're going to have to water them, maintain them for something that is likely going to have disease pressure or just die. So always, always, always buy quality plants. These next things are generalizations when it comes to raspberries. Again, there's so many specific characteristics that are unique to cultivars, but these are just some general guidelines or overview to help you get started. Spacing the plants 2 feet apart. Thornless varieties can go a little bit closer together. Again, if you're thinking about putting in raspberries, start planting now because you need to remove all grass sod. If you don't want to use chemicals, you can lay out some black plastic in an area that you want to kill. Let the sun beat down on that for 3-4 months. Whatever's underneath there should be dead, but you want to make sure that you are killing all that grass sod for a good seed bed. Deep tilling is not always necessary. If you have a good weed-free seed bed, you don't need to till. You just want to make sure that you have a hole big enough for the root system. Again, if it's coming in a pot, if it's coming in bare root, just make sure that it's big enough for the root system. You know, 12 inches, 18 inches in diameter, making sure that it is deep enough. Just don't plant it too deep. Again, general planting practices apply. Backfill with good topsoil. sometimes what we're planting into is okay, but it's not the best soil to get the plants started. So buying either a garden mix, a quality topsoil, or even some good compost to plant those in will give them a very quick start and allow them to adapt and actually become established in that good soil before they spread out the roots into whatever the existing soil is. Apply a complete fertilizer. Again, going back to last week, that's going to be like a 10, 10, 10, 12, 12, 12, what I call a balanced fertilizer when finished. And then you want to water in without drowning them. Don't need to put 15 gallons on each plant, but making sure that they're not thirsty either. If you want to go very intensive, you can get into the Trellis system. This maximizes air circulation and it also maximizes photosynthetic capacity because you're putting those raspberries up in the air. There's very little overlap of the leaves. They're not shading each other, but it is an expense to put in. If you are thinking about adding this as a complement to what you're already selling at the farmer's market, I wouldn't invest in the Trellis system. If raspberries are going to be your foundation of what you're going to be selling, either wholesale or otherwise, you may want to look into it because it does increase your productivity. If you have disease control, lime sulfur is going to be your primary tool. And the last I looked, this is OMRI certified, so it is organic. It will help you maintain a lot of your disease issues. And if you want to, let me back up here. If you have stem disease problems, those are a little bit more difficult to control than your fruit rots. So if you have fruit rots, that's a disease, botrytis or some other disease that are on the fruit. That's pretty easy to control. You pick them a little bit early. They may not be as ripe or as flavorful as you want, but at least you have marketable crops, right? So if you are letting them get a little too old on the vine, they're going to get a lot of botrytis. You're going to build up the disease in the environment. So pick on time and pick slightly early if needed. And again, we're going to talk about strawberries in a little bit, but if you want to grow raspberries in terms of organic or natural, no spray, it's absolutely possible. It just takes a little bit more vigilance and a lot more scouting than you would normally need. So here's a picture of the Trellis system. So you can see how it picks it up off of the ground. So when it comes to picking, it's a whole lot easier. So we have one cable here, 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 and here. So it's sort of not quite a true V, but at least they're spreading out a little bit. Those vines, as they come up or the canes come up, they'll rest on those and it makes a whole lot easier for picking. You can actually get inside to pick very much like a grapevine. But if you're looking to install this, the infrastructure to put this in does take some time to repay for itself. If this is, again, only a complement to your existing business. So weed management, there are quite a few different herbicides that are listed for control. Having a good mulch layer will go a long way. Bark mulch, newspaper, leaf mulch, just something that's going to drown out some of the weeds and suppress those weeds from coming in. Again, there's nothing that beats a weed more than going out and physically pulling it up or destroying it with a tool, right? So don't rely on chemicals too much. If you have a well-maintained mulch layer, pulling those weeds out should be pretty easy. And if you just have enough space in between your rows for your garden, you should be able to get a mower in between to control grasses. Irrigation, it's going to be important, but in Northeastern Ohio, other than this year, we typically have enough rain that you don't need to water or overwater or add excess water. So typically what we get throughout the growing season is enough to supply those raspberries, especially for small plantings. Oh, I see there's a question that came in. I've been growing raspberries from cutting of last year's pruning, and they're living and growing. Yes, so you can definitely do that. You just want to make sure that if you're doing that, you're choosing a healthy cane as a rooting stock, because if you grow brambles for a long period of time, you know that they'll fall over, they reroot, and then they keep going and going and going. So cuttings are actually a pretty effective way to increase your spacing. So when it comes to pruning raspberries, again, go back to your tag. Are you pruning out your fluorocanes? Are you pruning out everything? But if you're pruning just out your fluorocanes, you want to go through, if it flowered and fruited last year, cut those out completely down to 1 to 2 inches above the ground. Again, go back to that tag. You need to know, because if you have an everbearing with a summer and fall crop and you cut those out, you're losing some yield. But if it is just a traditional raspberry and you get one flush of crop out of it, prune out that fluorocane after you get your fruit. And then in the year that you get your primocanes, you can head those back. Don't tip them back. You want to actually go in and cut them back. If you cut back a quarter of the primocane, you're going to have a much more manageable stem the following year that's going to produce fruit. But if you go back too far, you can see if you cut off the top quarter, you're going to lose 15% of your yield, which is okay, because you're probably going to lose more than that if it's falling over and it's going to be on the ground. It's not going to be marketable. Now, if you go down and you cut off half of the plant, you're going to lose 55% of your yield. So don't go back too far. Even if you just go down 2 to 3 inches of your primocane, it will get you some nice, vigorous, strong raspberries the following year. So by pruning it back a little bit, you are preventing that growth from getting long and whip-like, and they're going to be stockier. They're going to put out more wood. They're going to be a lot more sturdy. And the following year, they're going to put out a lot more side branches that are going to be able to support more fruit and more leaf material. All right. So here's spring pruning. Again, you're going to tip these back. So you're going to start with this big mess, and then this is what you want to end up with in a perfect world. And I can tell you, when you go out and you say, oh, okay, I'm going to prune my raspberries, nothing ever looks like this, and you rarely ever end up with something that looks as perfect. But you want to get as close to that as possible. So you want to cut back the lateral branches to 12 inches for black raspberries. So it's just a couple of things to keep in mind. Black raspberries and purple raspberries are not as common, but just be aware of some special pruning techniques. And again, this applies to all raspberries. Hold on to that tag with your plants, right? I can't say that enough. Any questions on raspberries before I switch over to blackberries? I'm gonna have to pick up the pace here a little bit. Still have blackberries, blueberries, and strawberries to get through. All right, if there are no questions, I'm going to move on to blackberries, but please use the chat box if you do have some questions. I can answer those at the end. So again, blackberries are going to be very, very similar to raspberries. They're in the same genus. You can get them in erect, thorny or thornless, or the more common trailing, which you can set up in the trellis system, very similar to the raspberries. Not much different between blackberries and raspberries for planting moist, well-drained soils. Blackberries, you want to make sure you get some that are cold hardy. A lot of our blackberries, they don't overwinter very well, but you want to find some that are adapted for cold weather. And as you prune them back, you want to make sure that you are mulching the crowns with a lot of mulch. That's 6 to 8 inch layer. You want a nice warm blanket to help them overwinter, so you're not getting damage to those crowns. A couple of the common varieties for thornless: Arapaho, Navajo, Triple Crown, and Chester. The thorny varieties: Cherokee, Eldorado, Shawnee, and Darrow. Again, these are going to be the more popular ones for Ohio. Here's a little bit more information. So thorny blackberry, cane type, it'll tell you if it's erect, semi-erect, or trailing. It'll also tell you your yield a little bit here, berry size, winter hardiness. I can tell you winter hardiness is going to be, along with disease, winter hardiness is going to be one of the biggest issues. If you choose something with a fair winter hardiness, you're probably going to lose them in northeastern Ohio. If you're in southern Ohio and you choose something with a fair, you'll probably be okay. But up here, you're going to want to choose something with very good or good to make sure that they're going to make it through year after year. Again, nothing too unique here about blackberries. Very, very similar to raspberries. The big thing is going to be pruning and tipping back your primocanes and your lateral shoots. We didn't talk about this too much in raspberries, but tipping back, taking off that top 2 to 4 inches of your primocanes is very important for blackberries. So some weed management, again, nothing new or unique here compared to raspberries. Bark mulch, newspaper, leaf mulch. Mechanical approach, again, same thing. There are some herbicides labeled for blackberries. So pruning thornless blackberries before and after. So again, in a perfect world, you're going to walk out and say, okay, I know exactly what to do on this because I need to end up with this. Doesn't always work. So anything that is on the ground so here's our soil line. Take a ruler, you go up 12 inches, anything below 12 inches, cut it off. All right, so for pruning our blackberries, anything below 12 inches, cut it off because it's going to get down on the ground. It's not going to support a lot of fruit. So you want to go through and take some of these out. Anything that fruited last year, cut it down to the ground to 1 to 2 inches. And if you have your primocane, again, cut it back 2 to 4 inches, again, to promote that woody development that will promote a strong stalk or cane to hold a lot of fruit and get it through the winter. Oh. Any questions on blackberries? So there really is not much difference when it comes to blackberries and raspberries, other than sometimes there's some differences in pruning. And I say that sometimes because often or sometimes the raspberries and blackberries need to be pruned exactly, right? So there's just a lot of confusion. But if you have blackberries, you're typically going to have primocane and fluoroquine, and you're going to need to prune those effectively. Any questions on blackberries before I move on to blueberries? Right? Okay. So blueberries, these are near and dear to my heart. And so if you don't know, I was working at the University of Maine on my graduate degree, working on lowbush blueberry, Vaccinium angustifolium, which is a wild crop. So here is a field in down east Maine. These are all blueberries. So lowbush blueberry, they're just like they sound, they're low bush. They don't get much above 18 inches, and these are maybe 12 inches off the ground, and you go through and you harvest them mechanically or with a rake. These are not the variety that you typically buy to grow in Ohio. Blueberries love sandy, acidic soil, and this is perfect in down east Maine where the glacial till and a lot of granite. There's very little topsoil, if any at all. And the great thing about wild blueberries, if you look out through that picture, you can see light colored flowers here, dark colored flowers here. Each of these different colors is a different plant. So they actually spread by rhizomes, and they'll be 30, 40 feet in diameter. There'll be another one, and you can go out and pick the blueberries. And as you walk through this field, you pick a blueberry here, and you pick one here, and here, and here, and here. They all taste different. So if you ever get up to Maine in May, drive out through the blueberry barrens in down east region, Jonesboro, Jonesport. It is phenomenal. The smell of blueberry flowers is fantastic. If you get out there in August and very early September, you get out there for blueberry harvest, it's probably one of the best places in the United States to be in the summer. Sorry, all right. So when it comes down to blueberries, soil fertility is going to be your biggest challenge. All right, so I had a soil test report come in this week for blueberries, and the soil pH was 5.7. It's pretty acidic, right? Well, if you're trying to grow blueberries, it's not acidic enough. In northeastern Ohio, every time it rains, we're going to naturally neutralize our soils. Our soils are going to be in that 5.5 to 6 range naturally, so slightly acidic. So our subsoil is constantly going to be neutralizing any acidifying nutrients we put down on that soil. So when we look at our soil pH, if it comes back at a 5.7, we need to shoot for a target pH of 4.5 or 4, knowing that we're going to constantly treating that soil to maintain and get that low pH of 4.5 to 5. Oh, see, a question came in. Yep, the blueberry field does look more like a wild meadow. Absolutely. And if you are starting with a high pH, that's 6 or above, or even 5.7 or above, and you need to get down to 4.5, the only chemical out there that will change your soil pH effectively that much is elemental sulfur. So you need to raise the acidity or lower the pH. If you use ammonium sulfate, you may drop it from 5.7 to 5.5. Not going to be that big of a change. Iron sulfate iron sulfate or iron sulfur may work a little bit, but you have to apply a lot more of it. But my recommendation is always use elemental sulfur. It's not cheap, but it's the most effective. The good rule of thumb when it comes to blueberries, if you're looking around the base of your plant, your blueberry bush, and you see clovers or anything other than a grass that is growing, your pH is too high, right? If you see a clover anywhere near that blueberry bush, your soil pH is too high. Clover will not tolerate any soil pH much below 6. Again, that's a great indicator plant, but pH is going to be your biggest challenge. The only way to really know your soil pH is to do a soil test, and you want to amend that again with sulfur. Nitrogen is based on the age of your plant. So if you have a 1 or 2 year old blueberry bush, your nitrogen requirement is a little bit lower. If you have a 4, 5, 6, 50-year-old plant, your nitrogen requirement is a little bit more because you have a more established bush. So ammonium sulfate is always going to be the recommended fertilizer for a nitrogen source, because that ammonium sulfate, you're going to have your 21% nitrogen, but at the end of it, you always get a little bit of sulfur, and that sulfur is going to help keep that pH low. It will not change the pH drastically, but it'll help maintain a low pH once you get there. If you're having some issues with blueberries in terms of fertility, you don't think it's acting that well, you feel like it's lacking nutrients, the best thing to do is a plant tissue analysis. Like we talked about last week, our micronutrients will play havoc with fruit because we have long-lived plants, they're perennials. Doing a tissue analysis is the best way to accurately determine which nutrients you need to add or remedy. So when we plant our blueberries in Ohio, they're typically going to be high bush or Vaccinium corymbosum. They are native to northeastern Ohio. They're very, very hardy. They can get up to a height of 23 feet, not very common. 10 to 12, 13 feet in the wild is more common. They do have flower buds on the terminal end of the shoot, and the flower buds are spherical in shape. So the flower buds, again, are going to be almost perfectly round, and they're going to be fat. And the flower buds actually, if they're flowering this year, they're developing their flower buds this summer. So whatever they put out for this year for flowers were actually developed last year. So when we're thinking about perennial crops, what we do in the summer may impact or influence what our yield will be next year. And they will typically bloom at 800 hours of winter chilling, or this is the number of hours between 32 degrees and 45 degrees. It helps modulate flowering at the appropriate time. And it's typically called an epigynous flower or an urn shaped, and it's upside down, right? They're very, very distinct flowers. Planting, again, quality plants. When it comes to blueberries, your disease package is going to be pretty much the same. Disease resistance for most of your varieties. When we think about raspberries or blackberries, some of those have been cultivated for hundreds of years. Cultivation of blueberry, or domestication, I should say, hasn't really started until early 1900s, 1910s, 1920s. So most of the varieties out there are related. So even though it's Patriot, Blu-ray, Blue Crop, they're pretty much kissing cousins, right? So we're not too far apart. They're going to have very similar disease resistance, but where you will get some differences are in flowering time and fruit quality, because that's pretty much what has been selected for those plants. So choose quality plants. Later flowering will remove the risk of frost. Not always, but it will get you out of that frost window, so you may have a more reliable crop. You want something that has a good fibrous root system, and you want to acidify the soil long before you plant in a perfect world. So again, if you're thinking about putting in blueberries, put down soil for the appropriate rate in the fall for wherever you plan to plant them. Water in carefully. Blueberries do not like wet feet. If you want to put in blueberries, the best thing to do, again, is raised mounds. Start at 2 feet, knowing that they're going to settle down to maybe 12 to 18 inches for the raised mounds. Very easy to manage. It keeps the very damp spots of your plot or your land out of the root zone. Mulching, again, just like the brambles, very important. And apply a complete fertilizer. For nitrogen, you need to apply that every year. For phosphorus and potassium, always apply that based on your soil test report. All right, so a variety of crops, or variety of blueberries that you can plant in. The common ones are going to be Blue Crop, Blu-ray, Elliott, Duke, Spartan, Patriot, Darrow. Somebody asked, what variety of blueberry do I put in? My answer is always going to be Blue Crop or Blu-ray. These two are going to be easy to find. They are kind of the industry standard, or have been the industry standard. They have good disease resistance. They're good all-around producers. If you're looking for some very specific traits, you can look into some of these others. If you're looking for an extended period of blueberries at the farmer's market, plant based on flowering times, because if you plant early, mid, and late flowering, you should have an extended crop throughout the growing season. And pruning blueberries is very important, just like brambles and just like raspberries and blackberries. But when it comes to blueberries, because they will live to be 50 to 80 years old or more, it's important to rejuvenate that plant. So if we have our blueberry bush and we have our canes here, so this is just, if you follow it all the way down to the base of the plant, that's going to be a cane. Typically, our production on a cane is going to start off slowly. So year 1 and 2 of that cane, they may produce a couple of flowers, a couple of fruit, not going to be super productive. So years 3, 4, 5, 6, and possibly 7 are going to be very, very productive. After year 7, and especially by year 8, that productivity of that cane is going to drop off drastically. So now you're going to have a cane that is going to be up here. It's producing a lot of leaves, not a lot of fruit. It's taking nutrients away from the plant. It's shading the other canes. It's best to actually go in down here and cut that cane off. Now, when we're pruning a blueberry, we want to shoot for somewhere between 12 to 18 canes. So if we think about this, if we have 12, every year we're going to take out 2. So we're going to pick the 2 most vigorous canes. We're going to pick everything else out. We're going to take the 2 oldest ones out. So we're going to take 2 and leave 2. So we're constantly have new canes coming in, and we're taking out the unproductive cycle, or the unproductive canes. So it's an ever turning cycle for maximum productivity. If you let these go too long, again, you'll have plants that are 6, 7 feet tall that you can't harvest efficiently. And again, you're just not going to maximize your fruit production. And going back to IPM, if we have a lot of leaves, we're not getting a lot of air movement. We do have the risk of disease, although disease in blueberries is very limited. We still don't want to press our luck, especially in wet years. Right. So when it comes down to pruning, anything that's broken or dead, take it out. If it's diseased, throw it away or burn it. Take out the oldest canes. You want to promote sunlight penetration and increase air movement and promote new cane growth. So soil testing is very important, and we already talked about this, so I'm not going to go in too much detail here. Soil tests should be conducted to get your nutrient levels, but more importantly, your soil pH. Go down 0 to 8 inches, take out a sample, send it off to the lab. And if you do need a soil test, we do sell those in our office. And Cassandra may even have a couple in her office as well. Irrigation, so it takes about 400 gallons of water to make one blueberry. So remember when I said that blueberries don't like wet feet? You want to make sure that they're watered, but they're not overwatered. So they have pretty deep root systems, you know, but they need to have at least 1 inch of water per week. And the best way to do that is take some tuna cans or some cat food cans, put it out in your system. And when you fill that, you know, that's about 1 inch of water. Drip tape or tubes, so drip irrigation is really, really effective. You can use other methods as necessary. Yeah, and Cassandra says she does. I do. Please let me know if you need a soil test kit. Excellent. Birds are going to be your biggest challenge when it comes to blueberries. They will come in, and the day before you're going to harvest your blueberries, birds will come in, absolutely take every single berry before you get to it. Exclusion is your best bet with bird netting. Make sure you're getting netting that is small enough so that birds aren't trying to fly through it. And you can see this middle picture here. These aren't actually blueberries, they're grapes. But if you actually just take a net and you drape it over your blueberry bush, birds are going to land on that netting and they're going to poke their beak through and pull the blueberries back out. So if you have a trellis system, you want to make sure that that netting is 3-4 inches off the plant so that the birds can't get through the netting to get to the fruit. Scare devices, they work if you move them around. Mylar tape, the reflective stuff, I have not had good luck with that. But the best way to do any sort of, or prevent bird damage is to have an exclusion net. All right, any questions on blueberries before I move on to strawberries? And Amy said she may have some soil test kits as well. So if you're not in Trumbull County, check with Mahoning or Columbiana or whatever county you're in with the extension office or the soil and water district. They may have some soil test kits available. All right, any questions on blueberries? And Cassandra and I were talking before this started, we could fill an entire series on each of these fruit crops. So I realize I'm going through them very quickly. If you need more detailed information, please give me a call. I'd be happy to walk you through some of the issues you're having or some of the questions you have. So any questions you have, just give me a call and I'll get you the information you need. So strawberries, my least favorite fruit to grow. They are a bit of a challenge. They can be a hassle for pruning and keeping clean. So perennial, annual, soil fertility, we're going to talk about all of these in the next couple of slides here. So essentials for strawberry, long period for flower bud initiation in the fall. So flowers are actually made the previous year and they actually come out and that's what produces our fruit each spring. And you want to have some good winter protection because you have winter kill. You're not going to have those flower buds coming into the spring. But if you are producing an early crop of strawberries, just like sweet corn, the first to market, highest return on investment, right? Because everybody wants fresh strawberries, fresh local strawberries. If you can get them to market early, you're going to have less competition. You can probably get a premium for that crop. So strawberries require a lot of labor. Putting in the plants and the systems and the matting can be a pretty expensive investment. Not always, but you may have to have some capital to put this in. Strawberries, just like anything else, there's a gamble. Strawberries and frost do not go well together. So spread your risk. That's all I'm going to say. So strawberries are day length sensitive. So what does that mean? They will actually flower depending on how long the day is. So short day plants flower in response to long periods of night. So when we think of day length, when it comes to plants, it's actually the absence of light or how long the night is that will help the plants know that it's the appropriate time of year to flower. So short day plants, absence of light or how long the nights are. Long day plants in response to short nights, okay? And we're going to talk briefly, and I mean absolutely briefly, about day neutral strawberry plants. They flower regardless of the day length, but they're typically based on chilling hours and cold temperature responses, and even high heat will shut those down. But they are becoming more popular just because you can have a season-long strawberry plant that keeps producing fruit over and over again. Some of the very popular varieties that are grown in Ohio, Honeoye is probably one of the more popular ones. When it comes to strawberries, I've been harping on cultivar selection. I can tell you your biggest frustration with strawberries is choosing the wrong cultivar. Some of the root diseases like red steel, once it's in your soil, the only way to get rid of it, you can plant a resistant variety, but the only way to get rid of it once you have it is to plant strawberries somewhere else. So if you have a very small lot and you get red steel in your strawberries, the only way to effectively deal with that is to move strawberries out of that plot for multiple years. And I'm talking 5, 10, 15 years, because once red steel is in your soil, it takes a long time to get rid of. So even though these are popular varieties, these are not an endorsement. Go through and look at the disease resistance package. And when it comes to strawberries, again, people will buy a strawberry as long as it's red. Choose a good disease resistant package. So if you're going to use plasticulture, there's a lot of different cultivars out there that will work for that. Some are not so suited for multi-season plantings. Disease control in strawberries, again, my least favorite fruit. Disease control in strawberries is very, very difficult. If you have disease, you will be getting very, very low yields. You're going to have fruit that don't taste good. They're not going to ripen fully. And you will always have disease in your strawberries if you leave them in the spot for too long. All right. So crop rotation, think about strawberries after 2 or 3 years, take them out, put them somewhere else. Right. Again, so this is a revolving investment on refreshing and reviving your strawberry plants, because if you leave them in one spot for too long, you're going to have soil diseases that build up and you're just going to have lackluster results. Right. So there are a couple of, I saw a question come in. The revolving door of fruit. Yes, absolutely, Amy. So a couple of hybrids, bare roots for the Fragaria virginiana by Chileensis. Potted plants and bare roots. You can try the matted row system, the plasticulture. All of these work very well for our hybrids. Hybrids typically are going to have a higher disease resistance, not always. So again, check that tag. So strawberry irrigation, strawberries require a lot of water, and it's not always because of a drought. So if you have an early variety and we have a frost on the way, you need to have an irrigation system that will produce a mist or a steady stream of water that will cover those plants to prevent frost damage. If you have an acre of strawberries, frost will come in and wipe out your entire crop, and you don't want to do that. So investing in an overhead sprinkler system is very important.
Lee, there was a question in the chat. They ask, can you take the runners and put them elsewhere to prevent losing a year to reestablishing the lot?
Yes. So if you have the space, if you have them on rotation, so you always have, a year in season, a year out of season, so you're constantly rotating through, that's the best way to do it. If you have one plot you're putting in, you're waiting for 2 years, and then you have to replant again, you may have a lag in harvest. So if you actually are transplanting those and putting those in on a regular basis and rotating through, so that way you're constantly have something coming into production, something going out of production, that is ideal. So if that answered your question, yes, moving your runners is an effective way to do that. Oh, let me back up here. Sorry, my mouse is not working. All right, so strawberries and raspberries. So ecological or organic methods can be accomplished. But when it comes to strawberries, just think about anything that you've purchased from the grocery store. Those have been treated with fungicides, ethanol, not ethanol, ethylene, and everything else to keep them ripe, and they still rot pretty quick. So you have to be able to harvest on time and harvest frequently. So when it comes to managing strawberries, you have to have the labor, you have to have the time to do it, and you have to have a market for them almost immediately after picking. If you let them sit and you're not storing them refrigerated or some way to slow that growth of disease, you're going to lose a lot of your crop. So if you are thinking about going big on strawberries, have your market established so that when you have your crop, you can get rid of it immediately. So strawberries and raspberries have high nitrogen requirements. If you have a drip irrigation system, you can use fertigation to put your fertilizer through your drip irrigation system. So all root and leaf diseases of strawberries can be controlled by planting resistant cultivars. Virtually, right? That's not a 100% guarantee, but red steel, I'm going to use that as an example. That is probably one of the easiest things to prevent based on choosing the right cultivar. Root and stem diseases are going to be easiest to solve with cultivar selection. Fruit rots are a little bit different story, right? So fruit rots, that's going to come down to cultural and mechanical practices, making sure that you're harvesting at the appropriate time, putting out traps for spotted wing Drosophila, making sure that you're doing a lot of integrative pest management to reduce that risk so that you don't have to rely on fungicides or any sort of sprays, because a lot of those sprays, when you have disease issues on fruit, it's when you need to harvest. And if you apply a protective spray or fungicide, that's going to delay your harvest because of your harvest intervals. Oh, was there a question? No. Okay. So if you have a good mulching program after runner establishment, you can provide the control of leather rot in addition to suppressing weed growth. So strawberries, I'm honestly amazed that anybody grows strawberries without losing them all, right? So it is challenging, but it can be done. Just do your homework and get some good varieties and follow a lot of sanitation. And that's going to come down to weed management. Again, this is the exact same slide that we've been talking about with brambles and blueberries. Weed management, mulch is good. We're going to talk about matted mulch system here in a second. I believe I left that in. There are quite a few herbicides that are labeled for strawberries, but the best way to deal with that is a good mulch layer and hand weed when necessary. And raspberries, they grow very low to the ground. They're very, very close together, typically because of the runner system. Weeding by hand can be time consuming. So again, think about the labor cost associated with having these as one of your fruit crops. So strawberry renovation. So you want to cut back the plants. So anything that's coming into the margins, go ahead and take those runners out. You can transplant those. Any of the old leaves, mow those off. take those runner plants, again, put those wherever you want to establish a new bed. Apply a good balanced fertilizer. You want to apply your nitrogen every year, but your potassium and phosphorus should be applied based on your soil test report. Oh, I thought I left more in about the matted mulching, but I guess I left that out. But with that, there are several fruit production extension resources. I only showed a few at the beginning. We have the Midwest Grape Production Guide, the Strawberry Production Guide, the Fruit Pest Management Book, Brambles. The list goes on and on. So if you need any of these publications, please let me know. We have them in our office, and you can find them at the link that I believe Cassandra put in the chat box earlier. And again, that was a very, very quick overview, but we're coming up on 8 o'clock. If you have specific questions, please let me know, and I will do my best to answer those for any of the fruit crops, or if there's a crop that you're interested in I did not talk about, that Eric will not talk about next week, I'll be happy to answer those questions as well. Any questions? That was a whirlwind overview of how to get into the fruit business. If you are new to growing fruit, I do not recommend starting with strawberries. That's my one recommendation. They can be rewarding, but it is a very, very labor-intensive process. Any other questions? No? Feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat box. I'll wait just a couple seconds here. No? All right, well, if there are no questions, I'll let you get back and enjoy the beautiful Tuesdays that we've had. Oh, go ahead, Cassandra.
Well, hold on. I want to just go ahead and introduce one of our other partners, and I gave her control of the screen, and I'm going to let her close out tonight. So just before everybody goes.
I promise not to hold you up. My name is Amy Reher. I work for Trumbull Soil and Water Conservation District, and I work often with Cassandra and Lee. And so Lee and I are actually housed in the same building, nicknamed the Ag Center there in Cortland, Ohio. So if you're headed to Lee's office, you can swing by and visit me or vice versa. So I'm going to try and share my screen here real quick, just to go over a couple guidelines here. Okay, and so one of the things that a lot of conservation districts do are tree seedling sales. And in the past, we have done a number of fruit crops and vegetables, including things like asparagus, currants. We have had strawberries, much to Lee's chagrin, blueberries, raspberries. And so looking at one of our suppliers, even though we're a government entity and do not recommend individual companies, we've actually had personal and then professional experience with Indiana Berry Company. And some of those cultivars that Lee specifically mentioned are available through this company. And so it might be something to consider Googling them and trying to find a source, a reputable source, versus, like Lee said, unfortunately, if you go through something like Home Depot or Lowe's, you may unfortunately be losing your money. One of the things we also have are some native species that are probably pretty hardy for our area, and so maybe less of a maintenance concern. We've sold elderberry and then high bush cranberry, which high bush cranberry is not the cranberry you're thinking of, like Ocean Spray, the two guys standing in the bog, but can be used in jams and jellies and has been made into juice. The trick there is you want to make sure you have the American version versus the European version. The European version can actually be a bit too tart. And so if anyone is interested in any of this information, or if you're interested in talking to me about some species that you would like to see in a future tree seedling sale, just let me know. Most of the districts pack now on their own. So you may get our newsletter in the mail or our mailing list, and we may have a certain variety or a certain type. And then you may go to Portage or Lake or Ashtabula, and they may have a different variety of seedlings available as well. So I just want to put a plug in for that. And a thank you to Lee and Cassandra for letting me share my screen. And I'll turn it back over to Cassandra.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was awesome. Definitely check out the resources they have available too, because there's just so much out there, and I feel like nobody knows about it. We got to share and let more folks know about what we have available. It's super rich in resources for agriculture in this county. So I just love sharing all of that. And thank you, Amy, for sharing, and thank you, Lee, for your presentation tonight. And thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful evening and enjoy the rest of your night. We'll see y'all next week.